Hey, all you remote learners out there, how are you today? So today we're going to be wrapping up our portion of Chapter 13, Section 1, where we talk about the different European dictators and how their actions will eventually lead us to World War II. And we're really focusing on, their early years, their childhood, their rise to power, and how eventually those actions will get us into the war. We're not done with Chapter 13, Section 1 yet. We'll talk a little bit more about the actions that eventually take us really into World War II. Probably towards Friday. And then during the middle of the week, we're also going to be doing a little bit of Chapter 13, Section 3, where we focus on some of the finer points of the Holocaust, a lot of the information you've already learned in English class and such this year, but we will talk some more about that. So today's lecture, I'm really going to say write down as much as you want, as little as you want. A lot of this information was covered in our Roots of Evil video that we watched last week, which you should have done the video questions on. But we're focusing on today on Vladimir Lenin, Joseph Stalin, and Adolf Hitler. And really not so much on Vladimir Lenin, just so that you know that, of course, Lenin was the original communist leader. Remember, he was the one who was the leader of Russia, towards the end of World War I. He is the one who kills Tsar Nicholas II. He leads them in that communist revolution where the Red Army of the commies are fighting against the Whites. The Reds eventually win. He is the one that signs the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk that gets Germany kind of to agree to peace, and they agree to give up a lot of land from Russia, giving it to the Germans, and he turns it into this, communist country. And he was all about a little bit of socialism, honestly. It wasn't like true communism ever. In a true communist state, it's supposed to be that, there's no small businesses, but he honestly had a little bit of socialism in there because he let them have, individual small businesses. He called it his new economic policy. He, helped farmers, encouraged them not to grow as much food so that, when there's a shorter supply, the prices go up. And so it was really honestly more of a socialism than anything than communism. But Lenin had talked about how going from a society that was capitalist, focused on private property and profit, was not going to happen overnight to a socialist or communist country. Socialism, remember, you have government control over the major industries, but you still have small private businesses. The ultimate goal was to get to communism, where everyone just happily shared everything and there was no government that was controlling things. But honestly, that was, kind of a utopian, a perfect society kind of mentality. And no society ever in history, until this day, has ever been able to create that true communist society. And more so, communist countries have really always ended up with a dictatorship, an authoritarian style government that controls everything. But 7 years after the Russian Revolution, Lenin dies of a stroke. And if you remember back to our video, Roots of Evil, Lenin warned the Communist Party about Joseph Stalin. And if you think back to that video, you could see why. Joseph Stalin, or as he called himself, the Man of Steel, was definitely an intimidating figure. We know that he came from, humble upbringings, was not the richest of families, was, physically, mentally abused, did not like his physical appearance, felt that he was ugly, had this inferiority complex, suffered from low self-esteem, was interested in art. His mom, wanted him to get a job in the church, but he was not into that. And we know he was very controlling, perhaps killed his wife, physically, mentally abused his children, and eventually his first wife. He eventually moves on up through the Communist Party. He eventually kills his rival Trotsky. First he exiled him, and then later he hunted him down and killed him. And we know that by 1927, he emerges as the leader of the Bolshevik Party. That's the name of this political party. And he eventually is going to turn Russia, into this true communist party, this totalitarian state where there was only one dictator, one leader who has complete absolute authority over the people. And if you question his rule, you're going to be in deep trouble. So yet again, just so you remember, whatever you want to write down, a lot of this is going to be review from the video. So you can write down as little or as much as you want through your notes. I try to pick out the most important points in bold. But he does create this totalitarian state where he has complete control over people. They mentioned some crazy things he did in the video, like he was so paranoid as the years went on about, people who might try to overthrow him, political rivals, that, he, of course, has them persecuted, arrested, basically tortured, and eventually executed. as he is trying to take out all types of political opponents. Anybody who seems too popular, even if they're loyal, to him, they get executed as well. And people who are, just regular members of the Communist Party, just regular Russians, members of the Soviet Union, if they dissent, if they disagree with him, if they question his authority, if they question his policies for Russia, because they are going to be starkly different than Lenin. Stalin is going to try to create it into a true communist country, and that is not going to be very successful in the late 20s, early 30s, especially combined with the Great Depression. So, of course, as people are starving and we see people dying, there is going to be huge opposition in the beginning. And so he would purge those people. He's going to take them to basically labor camps, or we call them work camps, where they're going to work to their death. We also see that, he felt Jews from the very beginning and some of these other groups were unworthy. He doesn't quite buy into the belief that there is an Aryan superior race, the way that, Germans believe that there's a superior group, or the Italians believe that, whites are a superior group. But he still has this anti-Semitism and hatred towards Jews. It's really because the Communist Party is atheist. They really can't condone huge religious support for any type of God. And so Jews in particular, though, just kind of outraged Stalin. And so many Jews, homosexuals, very similar to what we're going to be seeing that Hitler does. Anybody who does not fit in with the mold will be executed, and they will be purged in these gulags, which is the name for these labor camps. And of course, just as we see with the other dictators, he's going to have a secret police. He's going to have a bodyguard system. He is ultimately worried and paranoid about people being out to get him. So under Stalinism, right, his dictatorial regime that he creates, where there is, supposedly a society where you still get to have a say in the government. And he's like, oh, you can still vote. You can vote for, your leaders. But when you go to vote, you're pretty much forced to vote. And the only person on the ballot really is Stalin. But you do get to vote for some of your local kind of leaders. But yet again, it's all really and truly controlled by the Communist Party. And so between 1928 and 1932, really the first 4 or 5 years that Stalin is in office, he comes up with what he calls the 5-year plan. Okay, and so Lenin dies, and he comes up with his first 5-year plan, and it's really a push to go from more of a socialist society to communism, where the government is supposed to be controlling everything in the beginning, but eventually it's going to change, and it's going to be this society where everything is shared and people work together and things are going to be great. The agricultural portion is a disaster. He forces collectivization of agriculture. So it's no longer that you're a small individual farmer, the way it had always been throughout history in terms of capitalism, where he was perhaps paying you not to farm to decrease the supply and up prices. Now it's going to be that the government controls all farms. You're basically going to be working at these farms and then sharing the food, sharing the resources. It's a disaster. People have no motivation to work hard. People try to hide basically their own share of, the profits in the food. There are some people who are supportive of this, but as the government is trying to control it and they know little about what's happening, we see that too little of certain crops are produced and a surplus of others. Then when it comes to dividing out the food source, there's not supposed to be a political elite anymore, but it seems like members of the Communist Party and their families do have access to the most food, the most resources, the most wealth, even though we're supposed to be moving to a society in Russia where it's classless and everyone's the same. It really wasn't. And so we see great famine. And we see that about 4 to 6 million people in southern Russia, which would make up today present-day Ukraine and into Kazakhstan, they die. They literally starve to death as more and more food is going towards the upper classes. And because they just have no idea what they're doing, the government had no business trying to control agriculture. So that collectivization of farming was a disaster. As far as the government trying to produce more steel so that they can produce more tanks and planes and cars in the future, and trying to really obtain more coal and oil in some of the southern portions of Russia near Ukraine, that was more successful, and it did create some jobs. The Great Depression, of course, also had a huge impact in Russia. Some of them did have property in, stocks in the U.S. stock market. When the market crashed, they did lose money. Obviously, since Americans were no longer buying into their products, they did lose some money. But it's more so just Stalin is messing up their own economy. His attempt to force them into such a strict communist society was a disaster. And of course, people were angry about, all of this control in their life. It's not what they thought it was going to be. Stalin was a very different leader than Lenin, who seemed to understand that people wanted to still have somewhat of a say in the government. They wanted a slow, steady progression to, communism and socialism. They perhaps really wanted socialism to begin with and never communism. And so Stalin seems pretty evil and maniacal, and many, many people are going to hate this man and unfortunately die from his regime. So ultimately, Stalin is going to change some of his policies. By the time we get to the mid-30s, he does go back into somewhat of a socialist society, encouraging individual agriculture, increasing war production. It will create new jobs. It will get their economy booming again. And that's when we start to see the flood of Americans leaving the US and moving to the Soviet Union. Now, as the 1930s roll on, Hitler and Stalin are actually going to appear to become friends. They're an unlikely pair, despite the fact that they have similar upbringings, similar maniacal tendencies. It seems like Hitler purposely tries to buddy up to Stalin. He talks about how they're going to take over the world together. Stalin is mistrustful of Hitler, but makes the alliance, and the two of them are deciding they are going to attack and pretty much take over Europe and take over the world together. And of course, later, Stalin will be stabbed in the back by Hitler when Hitler decides to invade Russia with that Operation Barbarossa they mentioned in the video. So now let's move into Hitler. The very top there, in case you're looking at the title, it just cut off. It just says inflation in Germany. So moving to Germany, we've already talked a lot about this last week, so I don't know how much you really want to write down, but we had talked about how Germany was really struggling after World War I because of the Treaty of Versailles, that evil peace treaty that the U.S. never ratified, that caused so much chaos, right? Because it made the Japanese bitter that they didn't get enough land. It made the Italians bitter that they didn't get enough land. The Russians obviously left World War I early, so they were never part of the Treaty of Versailles, but they wouldn't have probably liked it either. And the only people who really did like it were the French. But Germany, of course, was not allowed to attend the Paris Peace Conference. The Treaty of Versailles blamed them for the entire war, putting this huge burden of guilt on the people, leading to resentment in their hearts. And that resentment is going to be played off by Adolf Hitler as he decides to use it for his own purpose, to try to, show people that it's not your fault that all these people died, and we should have never blamed as such, and we can get revenge and show the world that we truly are this great nation. Of course, the other problem with the Treaty of Versailles is that Germany was expected to pay about $55 billion in reparations for the cost of World War I. They never could afford to pay it. We gave them, remember, as the United States, loans through the Dawes Plan, and they used that money to repay part of their debt to Britain and France, but they never were able to pay all of it. So their plan was, since they're experiencing inflation or a rise in general of prices, in the post-World War I years during the early 20s, and what we're seeing is that, the German mark really is not going as far as it once did. Prices are going up, and people are struggling to pay their bills. And as Germany is literally running out of money to repay all their World War I debts and trying to rebuild their economy post-war, and people are struggling and they're depressed and they're drinking, in the Weimar Republic, this democracy is really failing to meet the people's needs. They, remember, tried to use hyperinflation. So they're like, oh, we're out of money? Let's just print more. But we've mentioned this before. You can't just print money. Money is only backed up by gold and silver. And if you don't have any of that, all you're doing is basically taking the same money and basically like ripping it into little shreds. But you're just making that same dollar, go further, so to speak, because you're just creating more dollars basically, but you're not increasing the gold and silver amount any. So now the dollar is worth less. Instead of being worth $1, now it's worth 90 cents and 80 cents and 70 cents and 60 cents because you haven't increased your total amount of gold. And so over time, people are really struggling where, at one point, bread used to cost, I think I've got some stats on the next slide here, just so you can kind of see. Here's my statistics. One loaf of bread in 1923, just to kind of see the change. So Beginning of 1923, one loaf of bread was 90,000 marks. By September of 1923, it was 450,000 marks, and then it goes up to 3,500,000 marks. Yeah, that's absolutely insane. And then we've got 220 billion marks, okay? So that's absolutely insane. And about 4 German marks is $1, okay? And that, just to see the change, that's from 1914, and by the time we get to 1923, it's about 50,000 German marks is $1. So it's not that everything is going up dramatically. There is a shortage of goods somewhat, but if you just try to print more money, but you're not increasing your total overall wealth or value of a country and increasing the amount of gold and silver you have, all you're doing is, saying your money can't go as far, and you're going to have to use more dollars basically to buy the same good. And so we see a huge increase in prices. So to try to buy these products was ridiculous. We know that people literally, sorry about that, folks. We had little interruptions today a little bit. I'm in a different location today here in the building. My normal location is not available today. So moving on. So you can literally see here in the pictures, like these kids playing with that's money. And those are all German marks, and they're just huge stacks, like bricks of money, because like that would only be the equivalent of not even $1. So, their parents are basically letting them play with them because you would have so much money literally sitting around the house. There's stories of people getting paid, and they're getting paid so much cash that they would bring like wheelbarrows and work, and they would get paid, and people would start insisting that they'd get paid at lunchtime or at the end of the day, because by the next day prices would go up. So they would constantly be sending out their families to buy food at lower prices, because you never knew, how high the prices would be the next day. So things are really out of control in Germany, and there's not enough jobs to be had. People are feeling depressed. They're drinking. There's no way they can repay these debts from World War I. Printing more money was not the option. Clearly the government, doesn't know what's going on. And so we enter a really difficult time in these people's lives. There's the wheelbarrow of money I was talking about, which is why it's possible for Adolf Hitler to come to power. And so Hitler, of course, is going to be able to come to power because of the fact that he is so persuasive. If you, watched some of the Roots of Evil video last week, you noticed in the video when he was making speeches, especially in 1935 and 1936, 1937, as he is chancellor, as he is, in charge of, Germany, and he becomes this true dictator, even as he creates a totalitarian state and takes away people's voting rights and free speech and press and freedom of religion. People love this man because he gets them out of the depression. He takes away their guilt from the war. He creates jobs. And he's so persuasive and charming and is a good speaker. And, he's the FDR for their generation. It's just that he's secretly a terrible man. And even as some people start to realize that he is terrible, they convince themselves that it's not that bad, that it's an isolated incident, that he's not really mistreating Jews, and that, even if he's talking about taking over land, oh, big deal. What if we do take back some of the land they feel that is Germany's proper territory? They should have never lost to France in World War I. So people con themselves into believing whatever they want, for their own purposes. So in terms of Hitler's upbringing, I think he was a pretty cute kid, actually. And really and truly, if you go on to take sociology as a junior or senior, we talk about this, about how your personality is shaped by a mixture of factors, which we call nature and nurture. And so in terms of nature, we talk about, traits you inherited from your parents. And then we talk about nurture, the actual environment that you were raised in. So it seems clear that his father obviously had some types of issues, in terms of mental health. His father suffered from depression, suffered from anxiety, couldn't deal with violence, was a very physically, mentally abusive man. And he took it off on young Adolf and beat the heck out of him. And we know that when Hitler tried to run away when he was 12, his father continued to beat him so much that he was in a coma. So could Hitler have inherited some of these, mental health issues? Yes. But obviously, if you were raised in such an environment where you are physically beaten and told you are nothing on a daily basis, this is going to create all of this, mental health instability. So I don't tell you this to excuse what he did. I think Hitler's a monster, but so you can kind of understand more, perhaps, the choices he made and perhaps why, he was such a violent man. Of course, when it comes to Hitler, we know that he disliked his physical appearance. He thought that his nose was Jewish looking. We're assuming that his father probably, disliked Jews, had an anger, hatred towards Jews, and that probably, despite the fact that he really didn't like his father, especially because the violence, that still your parents influence your beliefs, and that clearly he had a lot of family members and friends who were anti-Semitic, and that they were the ones who really kind of instilled this belief in him that Jews were an inferior group. We know that he changed his last name because he didn't want any kind of ties to Jews. And, this all goes back to, yet again, his upbringing, where we know that, his grandfather most likely was a Jew, but, there's dubious parentage there. We're not sure really about his grandfather, but, he perhaps heard that a lot, maybe from his dad growing up, about perhaps how his grandfather was nothing. Yet again, that is really unclear, but he has low self-esteem. He was physically, mentally abused. He dealt with all this violence, and he's got a lot of issues going on. Of course, then we know his father dies, and it's him and his mother is sickly. She goes on to have breast cancer, and he's not really sure what's wrong with her. So he, considers, a job in religion for a short time. He's kind of interested in politics a little bit. He's in trouble at school. A very similar story to Stalin, and eventually he is really interested in art, and he moves to Vienna, but he fails to get into the Academy of Fine Arts. He blames this failure for artwork, not the fact that he can't paint people. He can only paint landscapes. And apparently back then it was also very important that you could do portrait artist work, and so he blames this fact on the Jews. He said there were Jews in the committee, and they're all about the Jews, and they hate me, and they're against me, not the fact that he wasn't the best artist. He obviously thought that he was fantastic with art. When he did kill himself and they found him and Eva Braun in that bunker in 1945, the one thing on his desk was his artwork and some pictures of his mother, Clara, and some other important mementos. Also during this time period, he sells his paintings to try to get money for his mother for an operation. His mom does get excellent care, but she eventually does die. She was struggling with breast cancer for a long time. And yet again, we think that he does thank some of her doctors, some who were Jewish, but he also blames them. Overall, despite his mother's death, he was pretty happy during this time period. And then, you got to see his cool art. There you go. I mean, he's way better artist than I am. I've also never really tried it, though. I guess if I spent my time on art. Then we get to World War I. And we know when he gets to World War I, this is when Hitler finally really finds his calling, feels like he belongs, improves his self-esteem. He finds something that he's really good at, and he's acknowledged for being good at that. And, unlike earlier in his life where he was really physically, mentally abused by his father, and his mother was always really sick and never supported him and never really stood up to that abusive relationship, now he's in the military, and he's doing a good job, and he's getting rewarded for it. He's decorated 5 times during the war. If you remember back to the video, they talked about how he received the Iron Cross First Class. He works as a courier. He ends up getting gassed in the hospital towards the end of the war. He is very angry that Germany pulls out of World War I. He felt like they could have kept fighting. He's very angry with Kaiser William II. And of course, he's very bitter over the Treaty of Versailles, feeling that Germany should not have been forced to lose all that land and be blamed for the war and have to pay for the entire war. He's like, look, I think everybody should take some blame for this war. Perhaps Austria should as well. Perhaps they should pay for some of this war as well. So towards the end of World War I, he's still a member of the German army. And, he never actually served that much in the Austrian army. He decided he wanted to be a member of the German army. He felt like they were going to have the better strategies, the better generals, despite the fact that he was technically Austrian by birth. So he stays in the German army post-war, and he gets a commission, more so at this point, in terms of civilian duties, now that the war's over, to kind of see how the new, the government is doing. And so it's kind of the military and the government working in tandem, this new Weimar Republic, and trying to create a peaceful society, yet still have democracy where people have rights. And he is sent to spy on the meetings of this new organization, this new political group called the German Workers' Party. And they're a laborers group. They're focused on capitalism and wealth and individual private property. They're focused on extreme nationalism, on protecting Germany's history and heritage, and they're very angry with the Treaty of Versailles. They're very concerned about the economic policies in Germany, how they're going to be able to pay off this debt, and what's going to be happening to their group. So what ends up happening is he's at first kind of just joining it as a spy, but he becomes like taken in by their rhetoric so much that he actually quits the army, becomes their 55th member, becomes president of the Nazi parties, and he gets them to change it from the German Workers' Party to the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or Nazis, as you can see the abbreviation. And so people love him. They think he is charming and, persuasive and, fun to be around. And he seems like he has all these great plans and ideas. And, what he's saying really resonates with the people. And so over time, now that he's head of this German Nazi party, he is going to, talk about how he wants to create the Third German Reich, or the Third Great German Empire, going back to the idea that once upon a time Germany was part of the Holy Roman Empire, and then of course it was the German Empire during World War I, and now he wants to create the Third Great German Empire, and he calls himself the Führer, or the leader of the fatherland, and he is going to be the one who really creates this Heil Hitler, basically as a greeting of solidarity, saying that, as you meet people on the streets, you should kind of heil them, say hi to them, connect to them. And then they're paying their respect to Hitler, because obviously he's head of the party. And then they'll start to do, this Nazi salute or greeting. And he's also going to be the one who really kind of helps create the Nazi flag. And he was always really interested in art, specifically in the swastika. It goes back to Asian culture, like 3,000 years ago. It was, used in India in Sanskrit. It pretty much had this meaning that, it was wishing you good luck and a better life. We know that Hindus and Jainists and Buddhists have used it. And so he knew that the Nazi party pretty much needed some kind of flag. And so he chooses the swastika to basically represent, this mission, their goal, to show that the Aryan race is superior, and it's supposed to wish them luck and good health in their future, in bringing the Aryan race superiority over others. But of course, nowadays, you see the Nazi flag, and it resonates symbols of hate and anti-Semitism and violence and death and murder because of what they did. But years ago, it was more meant as a lucky thing. And of course, he uses the colors of red, white, and black, going back to the days of the German flag and the German Empire. So what we see happen is that by November 8th, 1923, he is angry over the TOV, the Treaty of Versailles. He blames it for all of Germany's present problems. And so many members of the Nazi Party, who are now known as the SA, or his stormtroopers, they wear brown shirts, and they are going to basically think that they're going to be bringing about, a better life for the German people. But they're basically just members of the Nazi Party who are wearing brown shirts, and they call themselves the SA, and it stands for this long word in German, and people more formally think of them as stormtroopers because they're storming in, they're attacking. Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
And so they decide to pretty much come on in, and they're going to attack. And they're going to try to take over this beer hall, basically where people are drinking and dancing and stuff. And he's going to get up on the tables and say, you need to follow me. We need to overthrow the government. I need to become your new leader. Let's overthrow the Weimar Republic. And he does have some people who support him, but people are not ready to overthrow the new government yet. It's only been 3 years after World War I. They're looking for peace. They're looking for stability. He doesn't have this critical acclaim yet, this fame. And actually, by trying to take over the government, failing, ending up in jail, this is how he gains fame and more notoriety. So it was actually for him the best thing that could happen. And while in prison, he's going to be there for the next couple of years. All right, guys, so lots of interruptions today. As I said before, my regular space is occupied today, so it's rough trying to get a video done today. So while in jail, he writes this famous book called Mein Kampf, which in German means My Struggle. And this book is really important because it makes him yet again more famous. We know that many people buy it. And in this book, it's very clear. He lays out basically his plans for the future. Or he says all non-Aryans, so all people who are not of German heritage, who are not of Austrian heritage, who are not blonde, blue-eyed, who are not the master race, they need to be exterminated. So he's talking about Jews, he's talking about people who are disabled, he's talking about homosexuals, he's talking about anybody who is not part of his core group should be taken out, or they should be conquered because they are not the supreme group. So he lays out this racist ideology. He also lays out the fact that he believes in Lebensraum, or living space, and he says that it is in their future that they will move east and they will conquer all of Russia and perhaps all of the world. So it's really interesting because he laid out all these evil plans, but not everybody reads his book. And so Stalin, did he read it? Clearly not, because if he would have realized that, hey, Hitler is planning to move east and conquer them. Perhaps, Stalin did realize that was part of Hitler's master plan, but maybe he thought that Hitler had changed his mind. Hitler was very persuasive and charismatic and cunning. And so what we're going to see happen, we've got only a couple of slides left here, we're just about done, is that as Hitler is released from jail, he continues to kind of increase support for the Nazi Party. We know that by 1932, he uses all this propaganda, he makes all these speeches, and he makes the Nazi Party the #1 political party in Germany. And you can see how it's increasing from 809,000 supporters in 1928 to, 6,400,000 supporters to the largest political party. And it's because Hitler really is able to do it. He's persuasive and charming, and he makes great speeches, and he has plans for the future, and he promises new jobs. Now, in 1932, Hitler runs for president, but he loses to Hindenburg. Now, Hindenburg wins, but to placate Hitler, he was worried that Hitler would somehow try to overthrow the government. So he makes Hitler his chancellor, his prime minister, his vice president, basically, and figures, if I have him with me, then I can watch him, I can control him, I can make sure he doesn't, conquer the government. However, now that he's officially given Hitler such a high position in the government, Hitler goes ahead and he creates basically this new group of SS troops and Gestapo. Now, the Gestapo is going to be a secret police force, and they're going to be going around Germany and finding anyone who disagrees with Hitler or Hindenburg, who is a dissenter, who is a political opponent, and they're going to be interrogating them, arresting them, and perhaps executing them, since there is no real free speech or free press anymore. Most people are okay with this because he's able to combat the effects of the Depression and create new jobs as he's pumping up Germany for war. So most people are okay with it, and anybody who is not is clearly executed. And then people stop really saying things because of fear. So to lay it out for you, as we're going to see things kind of increasing, by 1933, the Reichstag, which is the German legislature, they vote to give Hitler even more power in the government. He says that he needs this power to kind of stop communist sympathizers who might be trying to overthrow Germany. And so they give him even more power. And then he says that he needs more military protection, that there's been attacks on his life. So he creates at this point the SS, which he calls the black shirts, and they're basically his bodyguards. They're also going to be doing a lot of his dirty work, going around and attacking anyone who is his opponent. Then there's the Gestapo, and they are the secret police. They pretty much go after regular citizens, who are not trying to follow the rules. And then, of course, the SA is still around, the brown shirts. They're a paramilitary group. They're supposedly peacekeepers in Germany. They're supposed to work for Hindenburg and really for the government as a whole. Originally, they were Nazi Party members, right, who were part of the beer hall putsch, who were trying to get, Hitler in power. And they still support Hitler, but they just support, Germany more so than anything else. And they're willing to make sacrifices for Hitler, but only if it's on the behalf of what's best for the Germany as a whole, I guess I should say. And remember, this Nazi Party is definitely an extreme form of fascism, right, where you are giving your allegiance to the state as a whole. So things are really going to hit the fan because in 1934, this is our last slide, Hindenburg dies, which means Hitler is now in absolute control of Germany. And so he is going to put into place a massive public works program. so he can put people back to work. He's going to cut unemployment. This is where he's going to really make people love him. You can see how happy they are, to support him. This is when he's going to really create the Hitler Youth for girls and boys to get them to have a whole next generation of people who are blonde-haired, blue-eyed, believing the Aryan race is superior, willing to go to war. He already starts beefing up the size of the military, increasing the size of the standard army, giving them training. He's trying to secure loans from other countries if need be, so he has enough money, to go to war. And, his fascist political party is stronger than ever, and people are definitely willing to give up their rights in order to create this Third Reich, this great German empire. And at this point, democracy only survives in a few countries, as most people are willingly giving up their rights in Europe in the name of a better economy and a fresh start. And people are willingly going around hailing Hitler, as you see there, willing to support him. And so I guess this is actually our last slide. How were the Nazis able to achieve power so quickly? Mostly because of Goebbels, that's one of his key leaders, his propaganda campaign, and because people were so worried about the economy and because Hitler was so persuasive. All right, guys, that's it for now. Have a great day. Later.